Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton. Peter Frampton was 24, while Chris Farmer was 25. He had decided to take his girlfriend on an adventure to explore faraway places and celebrate his achievements, while contemplating his future plans. Chris aimed to become a doctor, and he was dedicated to succeeding in that field. Recently, he had earned his medical degree, while his girlfriend, Peter, had graduated from law school. The families of Peter and Chris lived in the suburbs of Manchester, UK. Chris was the middle child among three siblings, his youngest sister Penny, his older brother Nigel, and himself. From a young age, Chris disliked restrictions and boundaries, but he was never aggressive or cruel. Instead, he had a free-spirited approach to life. The entire family was friendly and supportive of one another. Chris and Peter had met in school at age 14, and since then, they couldn't imagine life apart. Peter was active but more reserved, which helped balance Chris's enthusiasm. However, Peter and Chris decided to wait until after graduation to get married. Chris felt it was important to establish a stable foundation before starting a family, and Peter agreed with him. The couple loved to party and often took breaks to enjoy themselves. They frequently hosted themed gatherings, inviting many friends and acquaintances. Both had been working since a young age and had achieved financial independence. They held respected jobs, earned good salaries, and were able to travel. By that time, Peter and Chris had already explored Europe, visited Morocco, and traveled to various other destinations. In December 1977, they left their hometown for an adventure. Chris's younger sister, Penny, was envious of their journey. Chris and Peter spent about 6 months in Australia and loved it. They then decided to visit the Pacific Islands, explore the west coast of the United States, and eventually travel to Belize. They craved new experiences and want to live life to the fullest. Chris was passionate about traveling and often recorded video notes during his trips. He sent these videos and letters to his family, letting share in the adventures he had with Peter. On June 13, 1978, Chris' family and Peter's family received an update from them. They shared that they had been offered a short cruise along the coast on an American yacht called Dwayne Boston. This was a wonderful opportunity to enjoy some time on the open sea. Chris had loved sailing since he was young and was always captivated by large bodies of sea. In his letter, he excitedly described Captain Boston, who had 2 children on board named Vince and Russell. The journey was expected to last about 2 weeks. Chris and Peter, a young couple, embarked on a sailing trip with Captain Boston, a seasoned sailor who called himself a pirate of the Caribbean. Chris and Peter were experienced in extreme adventures, and the trip should have been trouble-free. After a while, Peter and Chris' parents became worried because they no longer received any updates about their children. The trip seemed like an exciting opportunity, as Captain Boston's ship, though small, offered a chance to explore the sea and new destinations. Peter and Chris spent their days fishing, relaxing on beaches, and exploring different cities and forests. Peter and Chris's plan was to enjoy their time on the ship and then visit more countries on their own after Captain Boston dropped them off. However, Chris wrote in one of his letters that Captain Boston was very strict, monitoring their work closely and punishing even minor errors. Captain Boston thought this was the best method to train capable sailors and young men. Boston's approach to education differed greatly from that of Chris and Peter, who were often surprised by the strict discipline he enforced. However, they believed that for 2 weeks, serious issues wouldn't arise. Later, one of Captain Boston's children recalled that, at the start of the journey, everything felt quite normal. But as the ship became cramped and minor disagreements occurred, tensions grew to the point where the adults could barely tolerate each other. The children Vince and Russell also frequently argued over minor matters, while their father, Boston, appeared to be disengaged. Chris informed his relatives that their plans had slightly changed. They now decided to land in Livingston, Guatemala, which meant they would finish their trip earlier than expected. After that, Peter planned to fly to New Orleans, while Chris intended to travel to Trinidad. Chris expressed dissatisfaction with the small yacht trip, suggesting that they were growing weary of seeing the sea every day. Additionally, the boat's limited space prevented them from maintaining distance from other passengers, causing irritation among everyone involved in the journey. However, Peter and Chris continued their journey, sailing around various islands, which made their experience more enjoyable. One morning around 11 o'clock, they landed on an island and went to visit the local lighthouse. There was a party there, complete with a barbecue and plenty of drinks, and everyone joined in the festivities. This turned out to be their last happy memory before something tragic happened. Then, Peter also wrote and sent letters to her relatives along with Chris. In her last letter, she mentioned that life on the boat wasn't always easy. Captain Boston frequently scolded his sons and had a quick temper. At that time, there were no mobile phones or fast communication methods, so it took about 2 weeks for letters to be delivered. Unfortunately, after Peter stopped receiving letters from Chris, she also stopped writing them. Peter and Chris' parents do not understand what happened to their children. The situation was complicated by bureaucracy. During this time, Guatemala was experiencing a civil war. Although Livingston was distant from the main conflict, it is still dangerous for foreigners because of the many gangs operating here, of which drug trafficking is a big problem. Due to the families of Peter and Chris were deeply worried. In Guatemala, dense jungles made it easy to get lost or to fall victim to gang attacks. It was common for individuals to disappear entirely. In such case, kidnappings were frequent, and for a foreigner, simply getting lost in the jungle usually means will die. Peter's family and Chris's family searched for any leads to find their missing children. They sent numerous letters and appeals across Central America, reaching out to city officials and medical centers, but they received no useful information. It was as if their children had vanished completely. Peter's family and Chris's family were devastated when they could not find any information about their loved ones for 6 months. They then hired a private detective in Belize, who took on the case and quickly established contact with a Catholic priest in Guatemala. The priest revealed that the bodies of a young man and a young woman of European descent had been discovered the previous summer. There were suspicions that these could be the remains of Chris and Peter. Any hope that Peter and Chris were still alive seemed to have been completely dashed. In August of the 1970s, fishermen discovered 2 bodies about 200 meters from the shore. The bodies had drowned, and their hands and feet were tied to prevent them from floating. They were also attached to engine parts, and plastic bags were found over their heads. It was clear that their deaths were violent rather than accidental, as a forensic expert identified signs of severe beatings and torture. The examination revealed that the victims were still alive when they were thrown into the water. This is a huge blow to the Peter family and the Chris family. They had suspected that the bodies belonged to their missing relatives, Peter and Chris. 6 months earlier, at the time of the discovery, the identities of the victims from the massacre were still unknown. They were ultimately buried in a standard Guatemalan grave marked with white crosses. To identify the victims, their bodies needed to be exhumed and compared with dental records from the UK. Implementing this process in Guatemala is very difficult, leading the relatives of Peter and Chris to attempt sending the remains back to the UK for examination by more experienced forensic experts. However, they encountered issues such as translation problems, bureaucratic obstacles, and indifference from local authorities. Ultimately, the victims were identified as Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton using the dental records sent to Guatemala, but the process took an excessive amount of time. Sadly, the family's struggles continued as they sought answers about who could have harmed their children. Chris and Peta were happy and friendly people, and their relatives could not fathom why they had died. Sadly, the truth behind this tragedy was only uncovered 37 years later. Detectives from both the UK and the US investigated the case, but they were unable to find any leads. In the 1980s, British police officially closed the case without notifying Chris and Peta's families. Penny, the younger sister of Chris, wrote letters to he for 4 years, sending birthday and Christmas wishes, but received no response. This situation deeply affected both families, Peta and Chris, who lost their son and daughter. They consistently reached out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, newspapers, consulates, and police, seeking justice and updates on the investigation. Sadly, Chris's father and Peta's parents never received any answers and passed away before the case was resolved. In 2015, Chris's sister, younger Penny, decided to take charge of the investigation. She developed skills in online detective work. However, she had very little information about Chris' journey, except for the ship he has gone on at the time. Eventually, Penny located Boston, the captain of a sailing ship named Justin B., on which Chris and Peta has gone traveling before the tragic incident occurred. Penny pieced together limited information from Chris' letters. According to the letters, Chris and Peta detailed their plans to travel along the Caribbean coast with an American sailor and his 2 sons, aiming to reach Honduras. Boston, a native of Sacramento, California, was the last person to see Chris and Peta alive. In their last letters, Penny sensed tension between Chris, Peta, and Boston, leading to suspicions that Boston could be the killer. However, there was no solid evidence to support these claims. While walking her dogs, Penny suddenly had a realization about what she needed to do. She had previously created an anonymous social media account to monitor her 3 sons for safety reasons. This time, it dawned on her that she could use this account to gather evidence against Boston. She also felt it was essential to find Boston's sons, Vince and Russell, as she suspected they were involved in the murder of Chris and Peta. Penny located the accounts of both brothers, Vince, 13, and Russell, 12, at the time Chris and Peta were murdered. She confronted them, mentioning that her loved ones had died on Boston's ship and demanded answers. Russell ignored her. However, after speaking with Vince, who was more open to discussing the matter, she became convinced that the brothers Vince and Russell were themselves deeply troubled by the killings of Chris and Peta. Vince explained that their father, Boston, was a cruel alcoholic who abused them. During the trip with Chris and Peta, he got drunk and killed them both, and it felt like a scene from a horror movie. Penny encouraged Vince to go to the Sacramento police station to testify. He appreciated Penny's persistence, feeling that it was finally time to tell the truth. Following her advice in October 2015, Vince viewed the confession as a long-anticipated relief. For many years, Vince experienced nightmares about this incident. His father, Boston, was a dangerous man who committed numerous brutal crimes. However, the most terrible thing, Vince lived with this secret for nearly 4 decades, torn between his fear of his father and his desire to expose the truth. He had previously informed his grandmother and the police about the murder his father committed, but they either dismissed him or ignored his claims. Now, however, his statements had convinced the police, causing them to conduct an investigation into archived documents from 37 years ago. As a result, the police in Manchester and the United States launched an investigation. By 2016, Boston was charged with double murder. Vince reported that he witnessed the murders of Chris and Peta, and his younger brother, Russell, who was 12 years old at the time of Chris and Peta's disappearance, also provided detailed accounts of what happened. Vince described how Boston brutally beat Chris, stripped him, tied him up, and attached many heavy parts of the car that were later found on the ship. When Boston pushed Chris over the side of the ship, he was still alive, but that didn't stop Boston. Afterward, he went down to the lower deck, where screams could be heard for a long time. Later, Chris was thrown overboard, tied up and naked, and drowned in deep waters, leaving no chance for survival. In his interview, Vince shared his experiences of living under the oppressive rule of his tyrannical father, Boston. While other fathers played with their children, took them on outings, and rode bicycles, Vince's father involved him in criminal activities, such as robberies. He intended to use his children to break into homes and harm people. However, Vince and Russell refused to participate, which only led to even harsher punishments from there. Vince felt relieved that, after many years of being overlooked, people finally listened to and believed him. At the time of the online investigation, he was 50 years old. Initially, he was too afraid to discuss the murder with anyone, not even his younger brother, Russell, who also witnessed it. Their father, Boston, had threatened them, saying that if they went to the police station, he would die. He justified his actions by claiming he had no choice, otherwise, Chris and Peter can report him, so he needed to eliminate them. Boston believed that informers were the worst kind of people. He worried about what would happen if Vince and Russell ever revealed what they had seen. Who would be the next victim? The threats and intimidation Vince and Russell faced deeply affected them. They had grown up under the oppressive control of an alcoholic father, who instilled fear in them and kept them quiet. Despite this, Boston's eldest son, Vince, wanted to speak out and tried to do so as soon as he escaped from his father's grasp. Vince noted that as an adult, he repeatedly reported the incident to the police, but his pleas were ignored and even mocked. At first, Penny believed Boston's children were involved in the crime. However, she soon realized they were actually victims of a criminal who had been tormenting them for years. Vince and Russell found themselves in a desperate situation, and Peter's fate was sealed as soon as they got on the ship. Records show they were misled into boarding under the false belief that Captain Boston was offering cruises called Robinson Crusoe. At first, life on the ship was enjoyable. The young passengers loved sailing and treated each other kindly. The Captain Boston took them to beautiful, remote locations, and they thought this journey would be a memorable adventure on their small vessel. However, the ship and its Captain Boston were not what they appeared. He took Chris and Peter on this trip to escape from the law. He wanted to avoid facing charges for a rape he had committed in California, so he fled to Belize. To the criminal Boston, Chris and Peter looked like a great opportunity for easy money. From the beginning, he planned to dock at a remote harbor to rob them and steal their belongings. As the police investigated this frightening man further, Boston, they discovered that he was likely involved in multiple murders. He had long been the main suspect in the disappearance of his third wife, Mary Lou, who vanished after expressing her desire for a divorce and wanting to take their two sons, Vince and Russell, with her. Vince, the couple's son, recalled that his mother disappeared in 1968 when he was just 3 years old. The children deeply missed their mother and were forced to live with their abusive father. As Vince grew older, he came to understand the terrible nature of his father, who had killed a couple of travelers without remorse, and he began to suspect that Boston was also responsible for his mother's disappearance. Boston had a motive for Mary's murder. He wanted to avoid divorce, the division of assets, custody battles, and alimony payments. Vince and Russell's grandmother told them that Boston had shot Mary in the back, but it was unclear where she got this information, and Mary's body was never found. Ultimately, Boston's involvement in Mary's disappearance could not be proven due to lack of evidence. The brothers Vince and Russell often sought answers about their mother's, Mary's fate, but their father was reluctant to discuss it. During his childhood, whenever they brought up the subject, he would harshly punish them, which instilled a lasting fear in them about bringing up the topic. Boston's children, Vince and Russell, described their childhood as walking on a knife's edge. Boston was often drunk and could become aggressive, and when he used drugs, his behavior became erratic. This led to harsh punishments for the children. They were reprimanded for even minor missteps. For them, the boat trip was one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives, as they feared they might suffer the same fate as their mother, Mary. However, during the trip, Vince fondly recalled Chris, who had taken the time to teach the boys new things. Since their mother's disappearance, they had not encountered such kindness in a long time. Boston was different around new people. He was charming, cheerful, and the life of the party. However, this changed when he became uncomfortable with strangers and began punishing his children again. For a while, Peter and Chris stayed silent and did not get involved in parenting issues because Boston insisted that his sons needed strict discipline. One day, Boston got drunk and started to physically abuse his two sons, Vince and Russell. This behavior outraged Chris, who could no longer stay quiet. He confronted Boston and criticized him for his cruelty. At that moment, Boston, still intoxicated, attempted to hit Chris, but Chris managed to dodge, causing Boston to fall overboard. Although he was helped back onto the boat, he held a deep grudge against Chris from that point on. Atmosphere tension and uncertainty filled after the incident. Boston felt compelled to take revenge because he thought Chris had insulted him. The following day, the couple Peter and Chris requested to be dropped off on shore. However, Boston attacked Chris from behind while he was distracted. He caught Chris off guard and struck him in the head with a single blow. Boston then delivered several powerful punches to Chris's chest and bound his hands and feet. Boston went down to the lower deck, where he knocked down and tied up Peter. The next day, he tortured and abused Peter and Chris, forcing Vince and Russell to take care of them. Vince and Russell were confused and didn't know what to do. They wanted to help Chris and Peter but were scared for their own safety. Peter asked Vince and Russell for assistance, but they did nothing. Despite the situation, Chris remained brave and did not cry. Days later, Boston announced Peter and Chris would be released on the shore. They were thrilled, thinking their suffering was coming to an end. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a cruel trick. After reaching deeper waters, he placed plastic bags over Peter and Chris' heads, tied them up, and then threw them overboard. It was essential to apprehend Boston, a brutal killer. Investigators discovered that he had sailed away from the coast of Guatemala on July 19. Only his sons, Vince and Russell, were left behind. After the incident, he returned to Sacramento and sold the yacht. During this time, he contacted authorities, claiming he had dropped off Peter and Chris near Livingston. He accused them of drug trafficking and using illegal drugs during their trip, which caused problems in Guatemala. However, the family of Peter and Chris knew that them relatives didn't use drugs. Despite this, Boston disappeared and could not be found due to bureaucratic complications, leaving the case unresolved. Sadly, the case never went to trial. Boston was eventually found in a nursing home in Eureka, California, and was arrested on December 1, 2016. While awaiting a hearing, he faced several health issues. Just weeks before Penny and her mother were set to fly to the U.S. for the hearing, Boston's health rapidly declined. In April 2017, at the age of 75, Boston died in custody. An autopsy revealed heart and liver problems. Medical staff at the prison hospital reported that after Boston learned about the upcoming hearings, he refused to take his prescribed medications, which worsened his condition. The penitentiary labeled Boston as a coward who chose to end his life rather than confront the repercussions of the massacre he planned. Chris's family had hoped for justice to be served quickly, but the Supreme Court let them down. By this time, Peter's parents had passed away and they did not get to see the case solved. Eventually, Penny wrote a book about her brother, Chris, who was an extraordinary person and made a meaningful impact, even at a young age. In 2019, she traveled to Guatemala to visit the graves marked with white crosses where Peter and Chris were buried. Penny wept for her brother and for his girlfriend, who had stood by his side until the very end. This journey was difficult but helped her to confront her fears and pain. Chris's relatives continue to remember him, as he had aspirations of becoming a doctor and brought great pride to his family. His mother lived to be 99 years old and often felt it was unjust that her son was taken from her at the young age of 25. She often expressed that she would gladly trade several years of her life for him, believing he would have accomplished something extraordinary during that time. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Timothy Jones Jr. In 2014, a particularly disturbing case came to light during a routine traffic stop in Smith County, Mississippi. Initially, police noticed a strong stench coming from the truck. When an officer approached the driver to ask for his papers, the man appeared nervous and disoriented. The officer's concerns grew as he inspected the vehicle, which had a strong odor of decay. The driver was identified as 37-year-old Timothy Jones Jr., and as the investigation continued, it became clear that something was seriously wrong. The case became more disturbing when it was discovered that Timothy had 5 children, but the truck contained only a few clothes and no sign of the children. The truth about Timothy's children was so shocking that it left the police stunned. Timothy Jones Jr. and Amber Kaiser were a divorced couple with 5 children under the age of 9, their names being Abigail, 1, Gabriel, 2, Naughton, 6, Elias, 7, Mara, 8. The family lived in Lexington, South Carolina. The two met as teenagers and eventually married when they were young. Timothy attended school in Mississippi, while Amber focused on raising the children and taking care of the family. However, Timothy's past was full of challenges. As a child, he witnessed his mother's mental health decline due to schizophrenia. She left home to work in intimate services, leading Timothy to believe that she had abandoned him. His father then moved him in with his grandmother at a young age. Timothy's early years showed promise despite his challenging childhood. He demonstrated a natural aptitude for mathematics, an ability to solve problems easily, and the ability to take computers apart and reassemble them to improve their performance. However, things changed as Timothy entered his teens. At age 10, he began using drugs and drinking excessively. At age 15, he suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident that affected the frontal lobe, the area of the brain that controls impulses and is associated with personality disorder. After the accident, he felt very jealous of those around his father. Over time, Timothy believed that his father did not love him and feared that he would be abandoned. Timothy struggled with emotional immaturity, despite his growing intelligence. This limited his ability to understand and connect with others, and impaired his decision-making skills. Although Timothy was accepted into the U.S. Navy SEALs program in high school because of his intelligence, his lack of athletic experience and lack of discipline hindered his progress. He only attended training for a few weeks, often crying out of frustration as he struggled to keep up with the rigorous demands. This led to depression and subsequent drug tests that revealed he was abusing drugs, leading to his expulsion. In 2000, Timothy began associating with people who were involved in illegal activities. Police caught him with illegal substances and discovered that he had used his father's name to write counterfeit checks. As a result, the police told Timothy's father that he had to report his son to the police or face arrest. In 2001, Timothy was sent to a work camp in an Illinois state prison for a year. Upon his release, he appeared to have changed, finding religion to be the guiding force in his life. He had memorized several key sections of religious texts and wished to live strictly according to them. Timothy met his wife, Amber, while working at a theme park in Chicago. In 2004, he invited her to his Pentecostal church. Within weeks, they decided to get married. At the time, Amber was 19 and Timothy was 22. As they settled into married life, Amber realized that the church had very strict rules for women, including not being allowed to cut their hair, dress, wear makeup, or wear jewelry. Timothy, who was very devoted to the church, also believed in the traditional role of women as submissive partners and expected them to focus on having children, following the biblical command to be fruitful and multiply. The couple soon had 3 children: Mara, Elias, and Naughton, each born a year apart. After moving to Mississippi, Timothy attended State University, where he earned a degree in computer science and engineering with highest honors. Things seemed to be going well for him. He landed a job as a computer chip maker at Intel, which Amber saw as her ticket to a better life. After living in student housing in Mississippi, she dreamed of raising 3 children in a larger home and even considered hiring a nanny. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Timothy chose to buy an old trailer off a dirt road in Red Bank because he dreamed of living on a farm. He bought animals to raise, and Amber stayed home with the children and animals in this isolated area. By 2012, the family had 2 more children, Gabriel and Abigail. He wanted Amber to homeschool the children, even though she only had a high school education. Amber felt increasingly isolated without her family and Timothy's family in Mississippi. She felt inferior to her intelligent and educated husband. Tensions rose when Timothy accused Amber of having an affair with a neighbor, causing their marriage to deteriorate. They began to consider divorce. In an effort to gain full custody of the children, Timothy told his divorce attorney that he was capable of raising the children on his own. Amber, without a lawyer and unsure of what to do, felt she had no choice but to agree to leave the children with their father, as she was unemployed and uneducated, and felt she had nothing to offer them. Timothy's marriage ended and his life spiraled out of control. He began using drugs and alcohol again, which worsened his mental health. Unable to balance work and family, he hired a babysitting service. The first 2 nannies said that Timothy's house was very clean and he seemed very devoted to his children. He then changed his services and hired 17-year-old Crystal, who had a young daughter. The nanny quickly became his lover. As their relationship deepened, Timothy attempted to control Crystal by forcing her to follow church customs, including wearing long dresses and growing her hair long. He also insisted that she submit to him, treating him as her superior. Crystal refused to comply with Timothy's demands, which quickly caused their relationship to deteriorate. Crystal quit her job after witnessing him beating her young daughter and his extremely harsh treatment of his own children. Timothy believed that punishing children was necessary for their safety and often made them stand on their toes for hours as a form of discipline. After Crystal left, Timothy hired a new nanny, who quickly noticed major changes in Timothy's behavior and home environment. The once clean house was now littered with trash, dirty clothes, and cockroaches. Over time, Timothy's behavior became increasingly aggressive, leading to daily punishment of the children. He also severely restricted their diet to oatmeal throughout the day and only fed them 1 meal a day. A turning point came in August 2014 when a nanny contacted South Carolina Social Services to report severe abuse and neglect in the home. She described the lack of food and the physical abuse the children endured. The abuse was so severe that teachers at the elementary school where the older children attended had reported it to the family months earlier. The school had previously required Timothy to sign a written promise that he would never abuse or hit his children again, as they often came to school with bruises. When asked about the injuries, the children said their father would grab them by the neck and slam them against the wall. On Thursday, August 28, 2014, Timothy picked up the 3 older children from elementary school, followed by the 2 younger children from a babysitter. That evening, around 7 p.m., Timothy became angry over some broken outlets in their mobile home. He accused his 6-year-old son, Naughton, of breaking the outlets and interrogated him. When Naughton claimed he didn't know anything, Timothy forced the boy to do push-ups and squats, repeating the sequence several times. Each time Naughton slowed down, Timothy whipped the boy with a belt. Throughout the punishment, Amber, Timothy's ex-wife, attempted to call and talk to her children. Calls were made at 7 o'clock, 7:02, 7:05, and 7:09, until 7:10 Timothy finally answered. During the conversation, Nada recounted her punishment, claiming that the broken outlet was an accident. This revelation further angered Timothy, fueling his rage. Timothy ended Amber's call and began mistreating Naughton for hours. The boy became extremely exhausted and dehydrated, and repeatedly begged for the ordeal to end. Eventually, the boy collapsed from his ordeal, ending the abuse. Despite Naughton's critical condition, Timothy left the boy alone in bed without providing him with any water or medical assistance. Phone records show that Amber attempted to contact Timothy 8 more times after he ended the call. That night, at approximately 1 a.m., Timothy took his 8-year-old daughter, Mara, to a local convenience store to buy cigarettes. After returning home, he attacked Mara, strangling her. Timothy then went to his 7-year-old son, Elias, and did the same. He then took off his belt and went to Gabriel, 2, and Abigail, 1. He wrapped the belt around their necks and pulled until they stopped breathing. Seeing that none of the children were moving, he took their sheets and blankets, wrapped them individually, and placed them in the back seat of the car. On Friday, August 29th, Timothy's father called him at approximately 7:43 a.m., but no one answered. However, when the nanny called at 9:36 a.m., Timothy answered on the second call. During the conversation, the nanny asked about taking the younger children to daycare, and Timothy responded that he would take care of it, saying that they were currently out and would be back on Tuesday. That morning, he drove from place to place. From noon to 2 p.m., he searched online for out-of-state drugs. By 1:27 a.m., Timothy was near Alabama, and his grandmother called him several times, but he did not respond and continued to ignore her messages throughout the day. A total of 23 calls. In the late afternoon, between 3 o'clock and 5 p.m., Timothy continued to search online for tobacco stores in Alabama and Mississippi, as well as campgrounds in South Carolina. That evening, at 8:04 p.m., Timothy's phone location was tracked to Georgia. The following day, on August 30th, his grandmother continued to attempt to contact him, asking why he had not returned her calls. Timothy's phone location was later tracked to Red Bank, New Jersey. On August 31st, Timothy conducted several internet searches at 10:08 a.m., looking for information about camping stores, RV parks in South Carolina, landfills in both the state and Lexington County, and animal care services. He also searched for 2 specific songs. That evening at 4:54 p.m., the nanny sent Timothy a text message reminding him to bring diapers for Gabriel and Abigail the following Tuesday. About an hour later, Timothy responded to her text message. He informed her that he was leaving South Carolina with the children to start a new life. He also asked the nanny to clean out the trailer and offered to take any belongings she wanted that he left behind. That evening, at 7 p.m., Timothy's ex-wife Amber attempted to contact him by phone, but he did not return her calls. On September 1st, he drove from place to place. The next morning, at 10:35 a.m., he conducted a series of internet searches, including queries about a body in a dumpster, methods for making muriatic acid, camping sites near Colombia, countries without extradition laws, and advice on fleeing when faced with legal problems. Throughout the day, he exchanged text messages with the nanny, who informed him that she had cleaned the trailer. He also received a text message from his employer at Intel, asking when he could come to work. Additionally, Amber attempted to contact him by phone at approximately 6 p.m., but he chose not to respond. On the morning of September 3rd, a coworker attempted to contact Timothy by phone, but he did not answer. Later that day, surveillance footage showed Timothy at a popular store, where he purchased several items, including a saw, muriatic acid, trash bags, a 5-gallon bucket, and safety glasses. The next day, September 4th, Timothy went to a bank at 6:33 a.m. and deposited a check for $3,518. On September 5th, his location was discovered in Louisville, Georgia, although his phone was only activated briefly that day. The bodies had been in the back seat of his car since August 29th, when Timothy dumped his children's decomposing bodies in a rural area of Alabama at 9:14 a.m. on September 6th. He placed them in black plastic trash bags and left them in a clearing in the woods. Later that day, at 7 p.m., Timothy was stopped at a traffic stop in Smith County, Mississippi. An officer approached the vehicle and smelled a foul odor. The carpet inside the vehicle appeared to have been recently cleaned with bleach. The sheriff stopped Timothy and asked him to show his identification and vehicle registration. When asked, the sheriff noticed that Timothy appeared to be under the influence of something. After testing Timothy, the sheriff discovered that he had an outstanding warrant in South Carolina related to child welfare. When asked about the whereabouts of his children, Timothy initially denied having any children. However, he later claimed to have 3 children living in South Carolina. The officers then asked Timothy to provide them with the phone numbers of his father, grandmother, and ex-wife to verify the children's safety. After the calls, officers immediately arrested Timothy. Once in the patrol car, Timothy became distressed and began talking to officers about his actions with his children. Timothy explained that one of his sons had been playing with an electrical outlet, and in a fit of anger and frustration, he grabbed the boy by the neck and choked him. Timothy said he was violent with his other children. He beat one of his sons until the child lost consciousness. When his older daughter witnessed what was happening and intervened, Timothy grabbed her and choked her until she turned purple. He gave conflicting explanations for his actions to police, with Timothy saying that when he saw his son playing with an electrical outlet, he believed the boy was trying to harm him, which led him to kill his son. When asked about his motive, Timothy explained that he killed his children because he heard voices that made him believe they were plotting against him. He also mistakenly believed that death would bring them more happiness in the afterlife. Timothy initially claimed that his son Naughton's punishment had gotten out of hand, leading to his death after overexertion. Timothy then decided to end the lives of his remaining children. Police questioned why Timothy did not call 911 if it was indeed an accident. Instead, he tried to escape and dump his children. That same day, Timothy led police to the location where the bodies were hidden, and on September 10th, the children's remains were found. During a search of Timothy's car, several personal items were discovered, including family photos, children's clothing, artwork they had created, letters written by their mother to the children, Timothy's college diploma, and his passport. These items were turned over to South Carolina police on September 11th. Among the items seized was a to-do list written by Timothy. The list contained disturbing tasks such as disposing of the body, grinding bones into powder or smaller pieces, and burning the body. It also included items necessary for these tasks, such as camping supplies, gasoline, and muriatic acid. Timothy was arrested on September 13, 2014, and was held in a high-security cell separate from other inmates. While in custody, he underwent multiple evaluations by mental health professionals, including psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and forensic experts. There are differing opinions among experts who have assessed Timothy's mental state. Some believe he suffered from schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, or a personality disorder. According to them, his mental condition at the time of the crime may have been worsened by his drug use and a traumatic brain injury when he was 15, which may have led to an underlying mental disorder. These theories were shared with the jury at trial. Other experts, on the other hand, argued that Timothy understood his actions. They pointed out that his efforts to conceal evidence, including from his children, showed that he knew what he was doing was morally and legally wrong. The investigation found that Timothy's internet search history showed that he knew what he was doing was wrong. However, the prosecution offered a different motive, claiming that Timothy was under immense stress due to the breakdown of his marriage and the challenges of caring for his 5 young children. According to Timothy's testimony, the alleged trigger for his actions was his wife's affair with a neighbor who later became her husband. However, his wife disputed this claim in her testimony, saying that her relationship with the neighbor began after her divorce. The trial was held in late May 2019 and included weeks of testimony and evidence against Timothy. The crime is considered one of the most serious in South Carolina history. Tragically, the children's last words to their father were filled with love. When police searched the house after the crime, they found Naughton's favorite toy from Toy Story broken into pieces. Naughton appears to have been the most severely punished, but all the testimonies agree on one thing: the children loved their father. On June 13, 2019, after just 2 hours of deliberation, Timothy Jones Jr. was sentenced to death. As a result, he is currently being held in solitary confinement at a correctional facility. This tragic case ultimately resulted in the loss of innocent young lives, unfortunately due to the marital problems of the parents. Both parents made serious mistakes that could not be undone. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Jessica Camilleri. Jessica Camilleri was the younger daughter of Rita and Vince, an Australian couple of Maltese descent. Unlike her older sister Christy, Jessica was born with an intellectual disability. Jessica had an IQ of approximately 55 to 60, significantly lower than the average range of 90 to 110, which placed her in the lowest 1% and classified her as having a mild intellectual delay. Individuals with mild intellectual disabilities typically follow a different pace of development. They may start speaking, reading, writing, and doing math later than others, but can learn to communicate and express themselves in everyday situations. This delay caused her to start school later than her peers. As a result, she was vulnerable to teasing and bullying by classmates who did not understand her condition. Jessica coped with stress and anxiety by lashing out in intense anger, often targeting women. As a result, she developed intermittent explosive disorder. This mental health condition is characterized by sudden, recurring episodes of aggressive and violent behavior. Typically, intermittent explosive disorder starts in children around the age of 6 and worsens during the teenage years and early 20s. It is a mental health issue, not just a normal temper tantrum, and is linked to low levels of serotonin, a hormone in the brain that regulates emotions and mood. Jessica's behavior at school was causing problems, and she often lashed out at both students and teachers. In one incident, she physically hit a male student and refused to stop. As a result, she was suspended from school indefinitely and was forced to stay home under the care of her mother, Rita, who received a disability pension to support her. Jessica struggled with 3 main conditions: intellectual disability, which affected her cognitive abilities, irrational anger outbursts, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. ADHD is a chronic condition that affects the brain, making it difficult for people, especially children, to control their behavior. Jessica was diagnosed with several mental health conditions, including severe bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety. Additionally, she had autism spectrum disorders, which impacted her ability to understand her own thoughts and feelings, as well as empathize with others. The effects of autism also made everyday tasks, such as shopping, using public transportation, banking, and working, particularly challenging for her. Jessica had fixations on certain things, including 3 specific numbers: 2, 3, and 5. These numbers were linked in her mind to her favorite colors: yellow for 2, green for 3, and purple for 5. As a result of her fascination with these numbers, she would often create random phone numbers to dial, attempting to speak with men. In one instance, she repeatedly called a family's home in Bangladesh over 100 times a day solely because she liked their phone number. In 2018, her fixation turned to harassment when she began targeting a meat company in Daylesford, England. Her behavior became more uncontrollable, to the point of threatening company employees, including the owner Matthew Leafield, and his family, going so far as to claim she would harm them with a chainsaw. Jessica had an unrelenting fascination with horror movies and she couldn't shake off. She would spend an enormous amount of time rewatching violent videos, especially certain films that captured her attention. Her favorites included Saw, Jeepers Creepers, and, above all, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Released in 1974, the latter film was about young people in Texas being pursued by cannibals wielding chainsaws. The graphic violence in the movie led to it being banned in multiple countries, including Australia and the UK. When Jessica's mother, Rita, tried to stop her from watching these films, Jessica would become extremely angry. Jessica and her mother, Rita, resided in a St. Clair suburb of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Vince, Jessica's father, divorced Rita when Jessica was a teenager due to her behavioral problems. Her frequent tantrums put a strain on her parents' marriage, eventually leading to their breakup. Jessica appears to have conflicting personality traits. She has low self-esteem and is childish and naive. However, she often feels narcissistic, believing that she deserves special treatment due to her mental health needs. This thing sometimes made her take advantage of others and prioritize her own needs above theirs. However, Rita still always takes good care of her daughter. She knew her daughter had problems, but felt it was her responsibility to take care of and protect her. After discovering her daughter's harassing phone calls, Rita took the initiative to apologize. Although Jessica loved her family dearly, she was especially close to her mother, who made every effort to meet her needs and chose to care for her at home rather than seek full-time care at a psychiatric facility. In Australia, about 1 in 5 people, or 20% of the population, experienced a mental condition between 2017 and 2018. This equates to around 4.8 million people. Women are more prone to these problems than men. Young people aged 15 to 24 years were the most affected. A mental illness is a serious, diagnosable mental health condition. It affects a person's thoughts, feelings, and behavior and can impact their relationships with others. Examples of mental illnesses include depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and psychotic disorders. These conditions significantly affect individuals' emotions and relationships, not just them but also their families and caregivers. The tragic incident on July 20, 2019 was the culmination of a series of violent acts by Jessica. Her history of assaulting and violence others has been around for many years, with incidents including attacking the mother-in-law of her sister and aunt by pulling their hair. Despite her convictions, Jessica was never imprisoned and was always allowed to remain under the care of her mother, Rita, who seemed to be the only person who could accept her actions. Jessica exhibited aggressive behavior towards women in public places, such as streets and shopping centers, often because she perceived that they were staring at her in a way that made her feel uncomfortable or ashamed. This behavior reached a boiling point when she got into a physical altercation with another patient in a doctor's office waiting room, resulting in her being banned from the office. Jessica's aggressive behavior continued in 2018 when she physically attacked a nurse during a hospital visit. As a result, she was admitted to a mental health unit for 9 days to address a severe episode of her mood disorder. During her stay, she was treated with lithium, a medication commonly used to manage bipolar disorder, in addition to antipsychotic medications. In the months leading up to the crime, Jessica stopped taking her prescribed medication and instead turned to natural to manage her health conditions. At the same time, her mother, Rita, was looking for alternative ways to help Jessica. Rita even paid $2,500 to see a psychic in Sydney's suburb who claims to be able to exorcise demons, an evil force that she believes is influencing Jessica. However, many relatives and friends were concerned that Jessica might pose a danger to those around her, but Rita remained convinced that her daughter was harmless. Jessica's older sister, Christy, described their mother, Rita, as a selfless person who always put benefit others first. This thing was especially evident in the way Rita cared for Jessica, who often rejected professional help. Rita's older sister also realized her unconditional love for Jessica and frequently expressed concerns that Jessica might harm her. However, Rita's motherly love clouded her judgment, causing her to overlook her older sister's concerns. In fact, the day before the fatal attack, Rita had to take Jessica to the police station because she had been making threatening phone calls to strangers. Yet she still chose to ignore the warning signs. On July 20, 2019, Jessica felt embarrassed when her mother scolded her in front of a stranger in a parking lot. The stranger simply walked by, unaware of the tension between them. After visiting her sister, Jessica and her mother returned home. Jessica then asked her mother to order additional food from Red Rooster, but her mother, Rita, declined. Jessica became upset and placed 3 separate calls to the restaurant at 9:18, 9:20, and 9:21 p.m. Additionally, Jessica asked her mother to call a doctor to come to their house. When the doctor arrived, he was frightened by Jessica's behavior and quickly left. He was pursued by Jessica until he managed to safely escape in his vehicle. Rita could no longer wait patiently, so she told Jessica that she had decided to call an ambulance and was to take Jessica to a mental health facility. Unfortunately, this led to Jessica's most severe episode of rage. That night, 57-year-old Rita was violently attacked by her daughter in her own kitchen. The assault began when Jessica dragged her mother by the hair into the kitchen, where had a collection of 7 meat cleavers. 4 of the 7 cleavers were broken during the attack, but Jessica continued to use the remaining ones to inflict harm. She stabbed her mother's head and neck more than 100 times, causing her mother severe mutilation. This brutal act was not solely a result of Jessica's anger, revealing a disturbing level of fascination with violence, likely fueled by her excessive daily consumption of horror movies. The forensic pathologist's autopsy revealed that Rita suffered severe injuries to her head and neck, resulting in her death from multiple stab wounds. The fatal blow was a severed spine at the 2nd vertebra in her upper neck, essentially leaving her head partially detached. Notably, Rita had sustained over 90 defensive wounds, suggesting she was conscious and endured extreme pain and terror for a substantial portion of the attack. This horrific discovery is especially chilling since her own daughter, whom Rita had cared for and loved, was the one who inflicted the brutal violence. During the brutal attack, Jessica's 4-year-old nephew was present at the scene. He was the son of Jessica's older sister, Christy, and had been in Rita's care for a few days. The young boy witnessed Jessica attacking and beheading his grandmother. When he attempted to intervene, Jessica accidentally inflicted a minor head injury on him. The traumatic incident caused the boy to vomit, further adding to the horror of the scene. Jessica called the emergency number from her mother's cell phone after fatally her. During the call, Jessica claimed she acted in self-defense, stating that her mother, Rita, had attacked her first. This led to Jessica defending herself by stabbing Rita multiple times, eventually more than 100 times, and then beheading her. Following the incident, Jessica disposed of Rita's head in a nearby neighbor's yard. Upon arriving at the house in St. Clair, Sydney, New South Wales, police found Jessica outside. Her clothes stained with blood, holding a water bottle. What's striking, however, was Jessica's reaction to the situation. Rather than displaying remorse for her actions, Jessica expressed concern about her own future. She asked police officers and later detectives if it was possible to reattach her mother's head, seemingly holding onto the hope of a miraculous medical help that could bring Rita back to life. A police officer questioned the practicality of Jessica's plan, but she remained optimistic, believing that medical professionals could work miracles through surgery. Jessica also asked if she would face severe punishment, including the death penalty, for taking her mother's life. The officer informed her that Australia does not impose capital punishment, which brought her a sense of relief. Jessica then confessed to the police that her idea to decapitate her mother had originated from the horror movies she frequently watched. A disturbing conversation was captured on a police officer's body camera when they arrived at the scene at 11:43 p.m. on July 20, 2019. Upon arrival, first responders were met with a scene they described as one of the most horrific they had ever seen. The following day, July 21, 2019, Jessica appeared in court and chose not to request bail. According to a friend, this decision was not unexpected, as Jessica likely lacked understanding of the bail process. Jessica Camilleri was found guilty of manslaughter in December 2020 after a trial that focused on her long-standing mental health issues. Initially, she had pleaded not guilty to murder, citing her mental health reasons as a reason. In early 2021, she received a prison sentence of up to 21 years and 7 months, with a non-parole period of 16 years and 2 months. This means she will be eligible for parole on September 19, 2035. Christie expresses her grief and shock, revealing that her younger sister Jessica was responsible for their mother's tragic death. While hesitant to forgive Jessica, but Christie expressed hope that Jessica would receive the necessary support and care in prison. This thing helped Rita could finally rest in peace knowing that her daughter's needs were being met, something that had failed to happen during her lifetime. The judge in the case offered counseling to the jurors, acknowledging that the harrowing evidence they had heard would likely haunt them. The judge said that during jury selection, several individuals had refused to participate in the trial. She also stated that Rita's murder was one of the most serious murders the court had ever seen. She described it as a particularly heinous crime and horrifying because it occurred in the victim's own home. During the trial, Jessica's lawyer revealed that she had expressed remorse for her actions in a letter to her family. In the letter, Jessica acknowledged that Rita had not provoked her and took responsibility for her mother's death. Jessica was evaluated by a psychiatrist who noted that she often lacked facial expressions when communicating with others. Although Jessica showed limited emotions, she did not exhibit signs of schizophrenia or hallucinations. The psychiatrist's conclusion was that Jessica required long-term, comprehensive mental health support to manage her risk factors and address her underlying issues. Jessica was incarcerated in the strictest unit of the women's section at the correctional complex. Throughout her time in prison, she continued to engage in problematic behavior. An incident standout involved a dispute over food exchange on September 9, 2019, and she responded by throwing a teacup at another inmate. Although she was charged with assault in court the following day, she did not receive any additional punishment. There were several other notable incidents involving her during her imprisonment. She got into a fight with another inmate on October 14, 2019, and was punished with 5 days in solitary confinement. Additionally, she disobeyed an order on November 3, 2019, and damaged property on July 31, 2020, resulting in a fine of $200. Another assault incident occurred on November 21, 2020, for which she received 7 days in solitary confinement. In January 2021, she was convicted of common assault once more, but did not face any additional consequences. Jessica has defended her actions, explaining that no matter what she does or where she goes, other inmates will continue to cause her misery. She also pointed out that life behind bars is challenging and vastly different from life on the outside. One major issue in prisons is the high prevalence of mental health issues. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, in 2018, nearly half of Australian prisoners had been diagnosed with a mental health condition. Although there is no direct correlation between having a mental health condition and committing a crime, these statistics suggest that many prisoners in Australia struggled with mental health issues before their incarceration. Research has found a link between mental illnesses and the likelihood of committing crimes, especially among individuals with psychotic disorders. Symptoms of bipolar disorder can directly contribute to criminal acts, while extreme anxiety or stress can increase the risk of violent behavior due to heightened emotions and impulsivity. On the other hand, being in a prison environment can worsen existing mental health conditions. The harsh realities of prison life, including the potential for violence from inmates or staff, can trigger or worsen mental health issues. Prisons are considered especially inhospitable environments for individuals struggling with mental illness, as reported by the Australian Policy Development Centre. A significant decision was made in the Sydney Supreme Court on May 15, 2023, in the case of Jessica. The court, consisting of Justices Peter Hamill, Christine Adamson, and Richard Kavanagh, decided that Jessica's case should be retried due to exceptional circumstances. A significant factor in this decision was Jessica's unusual behavior following the crime. After beheading her mother, Jessica carried the head into the street and asked emergency services personnel if they could reattach it. This action showed that Jessica's understanding of reality was severely impaired. Several mental health experts, including psychiatrists and a psychologist, testified about Jessica's mental health. Their findings indicated that due to her intellectual disability and autism, she had difficulty distinguishing between right and wrong. As a result, Justice Hamill decided to re-sentence Jessica Camilleri to 16 years in prison, with the chance of parole in 12 years. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Ada Betty Quadros Fernandez. Ada Betty Quadros Fernandez was born on September 13, 1977, in the coastal town of Chimbote, Peru. She was the first child of Victor Quadros, a veterinarian, and Fernandez, a teacher. Ada was the eldest of 4 siblings and consistently performed well academically, even winning knowledge contests. She had a happy childhood filled with dreams of self-improvement. Ada later recounted that she spent much of her childhood with one of her sisters on their grandparents' farm, enjoying the close connection with nature and animals. This period on the farm was one of the happiest times of her life. Ada came from a family that was not poor but also not wealthy. As a teenager, she looked for ways to contribute financially to her family. Together with her sister and a friend, she formed a group to entertain at children's parties. After high school, Ada enrolled in a private university to study law. However, her financial situation did not allow her to continue, and she had to drop out. Despite this setback, Ada remained determined to succeed and support her family. With this goal in mind, she applied for a U.S. visa. Like many young people from Peru and other Latin American countries, Ada saw the United States as a land of opportunities. She was determined to move there, work hard, earn a better income, and pave the way for a brighter future for herself and her family. Her family enthusiastically supported her decision. They sold some of their belongings and did everything they could to gather enough money for her journey. Her destination was Texas, where she initially planned to stay with some relatives. In early 2004, she started working as a waitress in a restaurant. Later, she joined a company that placed nannies in households. It was through this job that she met the Lazarchik family. The Lazarchik family consisted of Father Michael, generally known as Mike, Mother Renee, their oldest daughter Alyssa, and the twin boys Ryan and Kyle. Little is known about the family background, except that they got married in 2000. Soon after their wedding, Renee became pregnant with their first child, Alyssa. After Alyssa's birth, they were expecting twins, Kyle and Ryan. The Lazarchik couple wanted to hire a trustworthy babysitter to take care of the twins when Renee went back to work. Alyssa was already attending a daycare where she had made several friends, so they decided she would continue being cared for there. They interviewed several candidates, and Ada stood out as the best option. She was young, but not a teenager. She appeared healthy, strong, polite, and cheerful. Renee wanted Ada to start immediately so that she could work with her for a few weeks and explain the household routines, the state of affairs, and her expectations. She also wanted to see how Ada would take care of the twins. The family had a specific requirement. They wanted assurances that Ada would stay with them for 18 months, and Ada agreed to this arrangement. Initially, they was agreed that she would spend only daytime hours in the Lazarchik household, but after some time they asked her to move in, and Ada agreed. Everything appeared to progress well. The Lazarchik family was satisfied with her work and grew fond of her, placing complete trust in her. Numerous photographs documented joyful moments with the smiling young nanny holding the twins. However, the situation changed dramatically in the summer of 2005. Ada informed the Lazarchik family that her relatives were returning to Peru before relocating to Germany. Ada was prepared to accompany them and had already purchased her plane ticket for October 29th of that year. Understandably, this came as disappointing news for the couple, as it was not in line with their previous agreement. Eventually, they understood and simply asked Ada to stay until they could find a replacement. They even requested her help in searching for and selecting her successor. Ada agreed, but from that moment on, she no longer stayed overnight at the Lazarchik's house. Instead, she returned to her uncle's house at night and came back early in the morning. Given the change in circumstances and Ada's impending departure, the Lazarchik family scheduled interviews with several nanny candidates on October 12th. During the day, Renee called Ada and asked her to prepare macaroni and cheese for the children. Ada fulfilled the request and fed the children. When Renee returned home, she greeted her children, saw that they were fine, and after interviewing the candidates, spent more than an hour with her little ones before they went to bed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Kyle typically woke up crying at 5 a.m. on Thursday, October 13th. Twins usually sleep heavily and require someone to wake them, but Kyle woke up on his own. Renee got up, went to the twins' room, picked up Kyle, and soothed him until he fell back asleep. She then returned to bed. 2 hours later, at 7:30, Mike went to the kids' room, woke them up, hugged and kissed them, and left them in Renee's care before going to work. She changed Ryan's diaper, said goodbye to twins, and went to work. The kids were fine, nothing out of the ordinary, except for Kyle's early waking that day. His older sister, Alyssa, went to daycare as usual, but things took a dramatic turn around 1 p.m. when Ada called 911, very agitated, saying that one of the kids, Kyle, had stopped breathing and was turning blue. According to the information provided, the operator gave instructions on how to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation on the child. The person carried out the instructions until the emergency medical responders arrived. After a few minutes, they reached the house and took over the care of Kyle. They asked Ada what had happened, and she, very upset, explained that after lunch she had put Kyle down for a nap and returned to get his brother. But when she came back with Ryan, Kyle began vomiting and stopped breathing. While the paramedics were attending to Kyle, Ada called Renee to inform her of the situation, giving her a different version of the events. She said that after feeding the children, she took Kyle out of the high chair and, as usual, placed him on the playroom floor while she looked for his brother. But when she returned, Kyle was vomiting. She went to the kitchen to get a bowl to collect the vomit, and when she came back, Kyle had fallen. She said she picked him up, took him to the sink, and performed the maneuver that Renee had taught her in case any of the children stopped breathing, but it didn't work, and she also tried CPR. The paramedics transported Kyle to the nearest hospital after the initial treatment. When Renee arrived home, the ambulance with her son had already left, but the police were still on the scene. Renee took Ryan, the other twin, and asked Ada to accompany them. They followed the police, who escorted them to the hospital. During the trip, Renee called her husband, and they met at the medical center. A couple of minutes later, the doctors decided to transfer Kyle by helicopter to the Children's Hospital of Dallas. The Lazarchuk family returned home, leaving Ada in charge of Ryan, and headed to the Children's Hospital of Dallas. Ada asked them to keep her informed about Kyle's condition. On the way to the hospital, Renee began to worry that Ada might be too anxious to properly care for Ryan, so she called a friend to help the babysitter at the house. Ada, visibly distressed and crying, opened the door for Rena's friend shortly after the friend arrived at the house. The friend asked Ada to explain what had happened. According to Ada's account, Kyle had suddenly collapsed while standing between the playroom and the kitchen. Ada said she dropped the plate she was holding, picked up Kyle, took him to the living room, and performed CPR on him. Ada mentioned that Kyle's brain hadn't fully developed and that this issue had started at birth. The friend didn't fully understand, but Ada kept talking, expressing her love for Kyle and assuring that she would never hurt him. The friend tried to calm her, reassuring her that she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was a good person. In the meantime, at the Dallas Children's Hospital, the Lazarchuk family received devastating news. The doctor in charge of Kyle informed that the child had suffered severe head injuries, with multiple contusions on the head, left arm, and shoulder. A neurosurgeon met with the distressed parents to explain that something needed to be done to relieve the pressure on Kyle's brain, although survival was unlikely. A child abuse specialist who also met with Mike and Renee suggested that Kyle's injuries could be consistent with abuse. The specialist stated that Kyle's injuries were so severe, it was as if he had been in a car accident or fallen from a sixth-floor window. Renee initially found it hard to believe what had happened. She thought Ada might have accidentally dropped the child or was too scared or ashamed to admit it. However, the doctors clearly explained the severity of Kyle's head injuries and the amount of force required to cause them. Given this information, the possibility of an accident seemed unlikely. Renee promptly contacted another friend to pick up Ryan and remove him from the house. While this was happening in the hospital, Ada became increasingly anxious at home. Renee's friend had to go out to pick up her son from school and take him home. During her absence, Ada called her several times, asking if there was any news about Kyle. When Renee's friend returned to the house, she found Ada calm. Ada was no longer crying or talking. Shortly after, a police cart passed by the house. Seeing it, Ada lost her composure. She began to cry uncontrollably and scream, "No, no, no," collapsing on the floor behind a door and repeatedly insisting that she would never harm Kyle. Two female detectives arrived to interview Ada. She was the only adult present when the incident occurred. As the detectives located the house and got out of their patrol car, they heard Ada's cries. Upon entering, they found her extremely agitated. During the interview, the other officer called the hospital to get an update on Kyle's condition. When they discovered the diagnosis, the detectives told Ada that her story did not explain Kyle's injuries. Ada suggested that Kyle may have hit his head when he fell after she left him alone in the playroom, but the officers pointed out that the playroom floor was covered in soft carpets, making this explanation unlikely. When trying to offer another explanation, Ada said that Kyle may have hit his head on the doorframe when she was carrying him on her hip. In the officer's insistence, Ada showed how Kyle could have hurt himself and mentioned that Mike and Renee often hit Kyle's head without any problem. The officer checked the place where Ada claimed Kyle hit his head, but found no evidence of a strong impact. When the officers told her that the injury did not seem serious enough to have caused the extensive damage described by the doctors, Ada insisted that the impact was strong because she was running with Kyle in her arms. She also claimed that she had never shaken or hit any of the twins. The officers urged Ada to tell the truth, as it could save Kyle's life, but Ada provided no further explanation. Given the circumstances, the officers reported the situation to their command and took Ada into preventive custody for further questioning. The investigation team arrived at the crime scene to examine the house. After completing their task, they informed Renee's friend, who was staying at the house on behalf of the owners, that they could clean up and organize everything for the family's return. While cleaning the house, the friend found a piece of adhesive tape sticking out from the door of a cabinet under the kitchen island. When they opened the door, they noticed it was broken and held together by tape. As a result, opening it caused the door to become misaligned. They simply placed it back and secured it with the tape, but found it strange because Renee was always careful with broken items to prevent the children from getting hurt. They had a hunch and called the police to report the door. Shortly after, investigators returned to collect potential evidence. Later, when questioned about the cabinet door, Renee stated that she frequently used that door and had never seen it held with adhesive tape. By the time Friday, October 14th arrived, all of Mike and Renee's hopes had vanished. The doctors informed them that Kyle was brain dead and had no chance of recovery. Amid unimaginable grief, the couple authorized the removal of life support, and Kyle passed away 3 days later on October 17th. The detectives interviewed Ada in prison, where she was accused of premeditated assault on a minor. This time, Ada claimed that the day before the incident, she was preparing the macaroni and cheese that Renee had requested. Kyle was sitting on the kitchen countertop, and the child fell, landing headfirst on the kitchen floor and hitting his head hard. Ada said she picked him up and checked for injuries. The only thing she noticed was redness on his ear and the right side of his head. So she applied cold compresses and gave him a pain reliever. When the interrogators asked why she hadn't told this to the other officers, Ada said she thought they wouldn't believe her. She mentioned that she didn't tell Renee because, when she arrived home from work, Renee complained of a severe headache. Ada said Renee suffered from migraines and had requested that the lights be turned off and the house be kept quiet. The interrogators asked if she had fallen with the child, which she adamantly denied. During that interrogation, Ada learned that Kyle had died, and she cried for the rest of the interview. Ada was brought before the courts, where a judge charged her with aggravated homicide and set bail at $750,000, which was beyond the means of Ada or her family. Consequently, she remained in custody until the trial. At that time, the police indicated that she might be charged with premeditated actions, which could carry the death penalty. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Kyle testified that when he received the child, Kyle was already unconscious. The examination revealed multiple hematomas, bruises, on the right side of Kyle's head, as well as bruises on the left side of his head, shoulder, and both arms. Additionally, there were 2 small hemorrhages forming hematomas on the right temple. These multiple areas of hematomas on Kyle's head indicated that he had suffered 3 separate impacts. The examiner noted that the bruises were relatively recent, with one possibly being 12 to 16 hours old. Internally, Kyle had brain and retinal bleeding, which is indicative of severe trauma. Although there were no broken bones, the brain tissue was notably swollen, and the pressure inside Kyle's head was 90 millimeters of mercury, significantly higher than the normal level of 20 millimeters. Based on these findings, the examiner concluded that Kyle had suffered severe traumatic events consistent with blunt force trauma, possibly from someone hitting his head against a hard object. The examiner suggested that the type of injuries could also result from shaking and swinging a young child's head against a solid object, such as a kitchen cabinet door. The crucial testimony of a forensic analyst revealed that the distance between the fasteners of the broken cabinet door in the kitchen matched the abrasion marks on Kyle's head. This expert also analyzed the adhesive tape used to repair the cabinet door and found 2 DNA traces, one of which had a greater contribution and matched Ada's DNA. The minor trace could not be identified. After hearing from the experts, it was time for Mike to testify. He explained that Kyle was doing well the evening of October 12th and the morning of October 13th with no bruises. He also mentioned that he made breakfast that morning, opened and closed the kitchen cabinets to get utensils and food, and that all the doors were in perfect condition, including the one that was later found with an unexplained taped repair. The parents said they had breakfast with the kids and played with building blocks, with the twins crawling around in a playhouse. Based on all the evidence, it was easily concluded that the events that led to Kyle's death occurred when there were no other adults in the house. The prosecutor in the case stated that the exact circumstances of what happened to Kyle may never be known with certainty, but according to the evidence presented at the trial, she outlined a possible scenario. Perhaps Kyle didn't want to eat his lunch and, feeling frustrated or distracted by watching a soap opera, may have gotten out of his high chair without realizing the cabinet door was open. The prosecutor speculated that Ada's rage could have provoked the violent attack on Kyle's head using the cabinet door until it broke, leaving marks on the child. After all the testimony and closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. When they returned, they decided Ada guilty of capital murder of a child under 6 years old. When the verdict was read, Ada's mother, Fernandez, who had traveled from Peru when her daughter was arrested, stood up and shouted that she would free Ada because she was innocent. She stated that there was no evidence to convict her daughter and swore to start over with an appeal. After the jury left, Kyle's parents showed photographs and videos of their late son and told about his short 14-month life, from birth to the last picture taken a few days before his death. Family members talked about Kyle, while others simply couldn't stop crying. Ada was convicted a year later in 2006 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Ada and her family, giving up was not an option. Her parents immediately started a campaign to appeal the sentence, as they claimed that Ada's conviction was based on racism and ineffective public defense. But an appeal required money for legal representation and court costs, which the family did not have. In this case, Ada and her family have been continuously struggling to prove Ada's innocence. They are seeking support from various sources, including the Peruvian government, the Peruvian and Latino community in the United States, as well as solidarity organizations in Peru. In prison, Ada maintains her innocence and takes advantage of every opportunity for interviews. Their efforts have paid off, and in 2009, Ada's legal team filed an appeal citing 5 specific errors in the initial trial process. After reviewing the case, the appeals court rejected 3 claims but approved 2 claims. This was enough for the judges to overturn the verdict and cancel the trial due to irregularities. After this decision, Ada's family began fundraising efforts again to cover the $100,000 needed for a new trial. It took another 3 years to prepare for the new trial, which began on July 10, 2012, with the selection of 12 jurors from over 100 candidates. The defense maintained that Kyle fell from the kitchen counter on October 12 and sustained a head injury, and the situation worsened the next day when Ada, while running with the child in her arms, accidentally struck his head on the door frame. This time, the defense team presented testimony from a forensic expert with 40 years of experience. He suggested that some of Kyle's bruises may have been caused at the hospital during the insertion of a catheter to assess brain swelling. The prosecutor vehemently challenged this testimony. Another witness, an employee of the kitchen cabinet manufacturer, also testified for the defense, although he did not entirely rule out the possibility that Kyle's head could have hit the cabinet door. After the trial session was over, the jury deliberated for 5 hours, even requesting to listen to the 911 call recording again. Ultimately, they upheld the verdict. They once again found Ada guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her case remains a deeply contentious one, with her family continuing to fight for justice, asserting her innocence amid claims of a flawed judicial process and insufficient defense.